slid the invitation across the table without looking at me, like it was a piece of junk mail he'd accidentally picked up. Your brother's pinning ceremony is next month, my father said. I already told the Harmons you're coming. Try not to embarrass us. Not congratulations on your new position. Not we'd love for you to be there. Try not to embarrass us. I picked up the invitation. Lieutenant Commander Pinning, Naval Medical Center, San Diego. My younger brother Ethan was being promoted, and I was being asked to attend as a prop, the older sister who never quite figured it out. I set the card back down and took a sip of my coffee. I'll be there, I said. My father nodded, already looking back at his phone. That was it. That was the whole conversation. I drove home that evening on the 101, watching the Pacific go pink and orange beyond the guardrail, and I thought about all the things I hadn't said. I thought about them the way you think about an old scar, not with pain exactly, but with a kind of tired recognition. There it is again. My name is Vivian. I'm 34 years old, and for the better part of a decade my family believed I had walked away from medicine. They weren't entirely wrong. I did leave the residency program, April, 12 years ago, 6 months into my second year of internal medicine at UCLA. My father got the call from my mother, who got it from me, and by the time it reached him, it had passed through enough hands that the story had already hardened into something simpler than the truth. She quit. She couldn't handle it. She gave up. What actually happened was more complicated, and I didn't have the energy to explain it then, and by the time I did, no one was asking any more. So I let the story stand. People do that more than you think. You get tired of correcting the record. You get tired of watching someone's face not change even after you've given them every fact. And eventually the gap between what they believe and what is true becomes so wide that crossing it feels like more trouble than it's worth. I moved to Bethesda. I told my parents I was working in healthcare administration. My father made a face the first time I said it and never asked again. Healthcare administration. What I was actually doing was completing a fellowship in trauma surgery at the National Institutes of Health, followed by 3 years in the CDC's Emergency Operations Center, followed by my current position, which I had held for 4 years and which I could not, under the terms of my appointment, discuss in specific detail with civilians. What I can say is that my badge gets me through doors that most physicians never know exist. What I can say is that when there is a mass casualty event, a pandemic, a bioterrorism threat, a chemical exposure with an unknown agent, my phone rings before almost anyone else's. What I can say is that my title, as of 18 months ago, is Deputy Surgeon General of the United States. My father thought I worked in an office shuffling papers. My mother thought I was probably doing something with insurance billing. My brother Ethan, sweet, earnest Ethan, who had followed a more traditional path through Naval ROTC and medical school, and now wore his uniform with the careful pride of someone who had earned every inch of it. My brother Ethan knew a little more than our parents, but not much. We had an unspoken agreement. He didn't ask. I didn't volunteer. It worked mostly, until the pinning ceremony. I flew into San Diego on a Thursday morning and rented a car at the airport, a nondescript silver sedan that my father would inevitably comment on. He had strong opinions about cars. He drove a Tahoe and considered anything smaller a character flaw. I checked into my hotel in Coronado and called my mother. "We're at the Bayfront Hilton," she said. "Your Aunt Helen is here, and the Goshes came down from Orange County, and, oh, Vivian, your father's been telling everyone about Ethan's promotion. He had a cake made." "That's wonderful," I said. "He had Ethan's face on it, from his graduation photo." A pause. "You looked very nice in that photo, honey. He could have put both of you." There it was, tucked in like a footnote. I told my mother I'd see her at dinner, and hung up and sat on the edge of the hotel bed for a moment with my hands in my lap. The thing about my father is that he is not a cruel man. I want to be careful about this because it would be easier if he were. It would be cleaner. But the truth is that he loves his children. He loves us in that particular, suffocating way that certain fathers have, where love and expectation are so thoroughly braided together that he genuinely cannot tell them apart. He had wanted me to be a doctor since I was 7 years old, when I apparently told him at the dinner table that I wanted to fix broken people. He held on to that. He told that story at every family gathering for the next 20 years. Vivian said she wanted to fix broken people. Like I had made him a promise and then failed to keep it. He never understood that I had kept it. I had just done it in a way that didn't fit the frame he'd built. Dinner that night was at a seafood place on Orange Avenue. Long table, the whole family, pitchers of iced tea. Ethan sat at the center of it looking genuinely happy in that uncomplicated way he has always had, and my father sat at the head beaming like a man who had won something. I sat at the far end next to my Aunt Helen, who is 71 and does not follow social cues and therefore asked me, loudly, what my job title was. Deputy Surgeon, I started. She's in administration, my father said from the other end of the table. Not unkindly, not even looking up from his bread. Just filling in the blank the way you'd correct a child who'd mislabeled something on a worksheet. I closed my mouth. Aunt Helen patted my hand. That's steady work, dear. Ethan caught my eye across the table. His expression was apologetic in that helpless way. I'm sorry, I don't know what to do about him either. I gave him a small smile and reached for my iced tea. After dinner, walking back to our cars, my father put his arm around Ethan and said something that made Ethan laugh. I walked a few steps behind them, watching, and I felt it, that particular shape of grief that has no name, not jealousy, not quite. More like standing outside a window and looking in at a warmth you're not sure you were ever invited to share. My mother fell into step beside me. He's proud of Ethan, she said quietly. You know he's proud of you too. In what way? I asked. I wasn't being sarcastic. I genuinely wanted to know what form it took. She didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. The ceremony was held at the Naval Medical Center, San Diego, in a formal hall that smelled like floor wax and institutional coffee. Rows of chairs faced a small stage. Ethan's commanding officer stood at a podium. Family members filled the rows, some of them crying already, which I always find remarkable, the people who cry at the beginning, before anything has even happened yet. I sat between my mother and Aunt Helen. My father was in the row ahead, turned around in his chair, talking to one of Ethan's colleagues, laughing at something. I was wearing a dark blazer, no insignia, nothing to identify me. I had learned years ago to be a blank page in rooms like this, to sit quietly and let other people fill in whatever story they needed. The ceremony began. Ethan walked in with his fellow officers and I felt my chest tighten with actual pride, uncomplicated and genuine. Whatever else was true about my family, my brother had worked extraordinarily hard, and he deserved every piece of this moment. The commanding officer spoke about duty and service. The flags were crisp. The room was quiet, in that specific way that formal military spaces get quiet, like everyone agrees to hold still. And then something happened that I had not anticipated. A side door opened near the front of the hall. 3 people walked in, 2 in navy dress whites, 1 in civilian clothes, a dark suit, a familiar bearing. The room didn't react dramatically, but I felt a small shift, the way a room subtly reorganizes itself when someone important enters. Because the woman in the center was Rear Admiral Patricia Holt. I recognized her immediately. She had overseen joint medical operations with my office for 2 years. We had worked through 3 major incidents together. She knew my face, my work, and my clearance level. She was here because her daughter was also being pinned today. I looked straight ahead. I kept my face neutral. Please, I thought, in the calm, rational way you think things when you know they are not going to happen. Please don't notice me. She noticed me. I saw the moment her eyes found me across the rows of seated family members, the small double take, the recognition, and then, because Rear Admiral Patricia Holt is a decisive person who does not second-guess herself. She walked directly toward me. My father was still turned around in his chair, talking. "Vivienne," she said warmly, stopping at our row. She extended her hand. "I had no idea you'd be here." I stood and shook her hand. "My brother," I said. "Lieutenant Commander Ethan Beckett." "Of course," she smiled. Small world. Then she lowered her voice slightly. "Not enough. Are you here in an official capacity or family only?" I said. "Good. You deserve a day off." She squeezed my hand, nodded at my mother, and moved toward her seat. The entire exchange lasted maybe 45 seconds. My father had stopped talking. I sat back down. I smoothed my blazer. I looked at the stage. My mother leaned toward me and said very quietly, "Was that a Rear Admiral?" "Yes. She knows you?" "We've worked together." A long pause. "In administration?" I didn't answer. The pinning itself was beautiful. Ethan stood at attention while his wife pinned the new insignia to his collar, her hand shaking slightly from nerves or emotion or both, and he looked at her with an expression so unguarded and tender that I had to look away for a second because it felt like something private. After the ceremony, there was a reception in an adjacent room. White tablecloths, shrimp cocktail, a navy band playing in the corner, slightly too loud for the size of the room. Ethan found me immediately. He wrapped me in a hug that lifted me slightly off the ground, which he has been doing since he was 17 and discovered he was taller than me. "You came," he said. "I said I would." He pulled back and looked at me with that particular expression, the one that meant he had questions he wasn't sure he was allowed to ask. "Did Dad see?" "Yes." "How bad?" "Unknown." "Assessing." He laughed, a short, relieved sound. "Vivienne." "What exactly is your title right now?" I told him. He stared at me for a moment. Then he said, "Does Dad know?" "He knows I'm in healthcare administration." Ethan put his hand over his face. "It was just easier," I said, and I meant it. Not as an excuse, just as a fact. It had been easier, and then it had been a habit, and then it had been so long that changing it felt more disruptive than the silence. "He had a cake made with my face on it," Ethan said. "He could have." "Ethan." "Put both of us, Ethan. This is your day. Please go enjoy your cake." He looked at me for a moment longer. Then he nodded. Then he went to find his wife. I got a glass of sparkling water and stood near the window that looked out over the parking lot toward a strip of the bay, visible between the buildings, flat and silver in the afternoon light. My father appeared beside me. He didn't say anything at first. We stood there together looking at the water. "That was a Rear Admiral," he finally said. "Yes. She called you by your first name. We know each other." Another long pause. "Through your administration work?" I turned and looked at him, and I don't know what he saw in my face. I've always been told I'm difficult to read, but something in his expression shifted, a small loosening, like a door that has been stuck for a long time and has just begun, without any particular effort, to give. "What do you actually do?" he asked. Very quietly, I considered that question. I had considered it for 12 years in various forms, imagining this conversation, rehearsing it, letting it go, picking it up again. "I fix broken people," I said, "at scale." He looked at me. "I left the residency because I was recruited into a federal program," I said. I couldn't talk about it. I still can't talk about most of it. But I can tell you my title if you want it. He didn't say yes, but he didn't look away. I told him. He was quiet for a long time. Out the window, a gull crossed in front of the strip of bay and disappeared behind a building. The Navy band finished one song and started another. Someone at the shrimp cocktail table laughed at something, a bright, uncomplicated sound. My father turned away from the window and looked at the room, at Ethan standing with his wife, at my mother talking to Aunt Helen, at all of it, and I watched him process something that I think he'd been carrying without knowing he was carrying it. "You should have told me," he said. "You should have asked," I said, gently. I meant it gently. He looked back at me. I told you I wanted to fix broken people, I said. I was 7. You've been telling that story my entire life. I kept the promise. I just kept it in a building without windows, and I couldn't talk about it at dinner. His jaw moved. He looked like a man who has just understood the punchline of a long joke and is deciding whether to laugh or to grieve. "The Rear Admiral," he said finally. "She works with you. She coordinates with my office, yes, and she came over to say hello. We've been through some difficult situations together," I said. "People who've done that tend to be glad to see each other." He was quiet again. His hand at his side opened and closed once. "Rivienne," he said. "Dad, I had a cake made with Ethan's face on it. I know. I didn't." He stopped. "I didn't know to put you on it." "No," I said. "You didn't. It wasn't an absolution. I wasn't offering one yet." But it was honest, which is more than we'd managed in 12 years, and I watched him receive it with the particular stillness of a person who knows they are not going to argue. "Can I get you something?" he said finally. "From the table. They have shrimp." I almost laughed. I didn't. "Sure," I said. "I'll come with you." We walked across the reception room together, my father and I, past the navy band and the white tablecloths, and my beaming brother, who caught my eye over his wife's shoulder and gave me a look that asked 100 questions at once. I gave him the smallest nod. Later, after the reception, after Ethan and his wife left for their own celebration, after Aunt Helen fell asleep in the hotel lobby armchair and had to be gently redirected, my mother and father and I sat in a corner booth at a diner on Orange Avenue and ate breakfast food at 7 in the evening because my mother said she'd been thinking about pancakes since noon and nobody argued. My father ordered coffee. He wrapped his hands around the mug, the way he always has, both palms flat, like he was warming himself from the inside out. "Tell me," he said, "as much as you can." So I did. Not everything. Not the parts I couldn't. But enough. Enough that by the time our food came, something in the air between us had shifted into something that felt, cautiously, like the beginning of a different kind of conversation. Not the end of a long silence, exactly. More like the first light after one. My mother cried a little, which she does at most things, and dabbed at her eyes with her paper napkin, and then ate an impressive amount of pancakes. My father didn't cry. He's not built for it. But when we walked back to the parking lot afterward, he put his hand briefly on my shoulder, just for a moment, just long enough to be intentional, and said nothing. He didn't need to. Some things don't require words. They just require someone to finally show up and stay. I drove back to my hotel alone, along the bay, the water dark now and scattered with lights from the ships anchored offshore. And I thought about that 7-year-old girl who sat at a dinner table and said she wanted to fix broken people. She had no idea what she was asking for. She had no idea how much it would cost, or how long it would take, or how many rooms she would sit in, alone, unnamed, deliberately invisible, before anyone thought to look for her. But she kept the promise. She always kept the promise. I've thought a lot about that reception room, the shrimp cocktail, the navy band playing slightly too loud, my father standing next to me at that window looking out at a strip of the bay like he was trying to find something in it. What I keep coming back to is this: the truth doesn't disappear because someone stops looking for it. It just waits. It waits the way water waits, patient, shapeless, finding its level eventually no matter how many things you stack in its way. My father built a story about me 20 years ago and lived inside it so completely that he stopped noticing it was a story. That's not cruelty. I've had to make peace with that. It's something quieter and more common than cruelty. It's the failure of curiosity. He loved me enough to show up, but not yet enough to ask. And there is a difference. For a long time I carried that difference like a stone. I told myself it didn't bother me. I built a life that was meaningful and demanding and real. And I told myself that the silence between us was just the cost of the work, the necessary price of operating in rooms that couldn't be described at dinner. and that was partly true. But partly I was waiting. I don't think I admitted that to myself until my father said, "Tell me, as much as you can," and I realized my whole chest had been braced for exactly those words for over a decade. There's something in the way Vivian carried herself through all of it, not with bitterness, not with a particular performance of dignity that people put on when they want credit for their suffering, that I think about when I need to remind myself what it actually looks like to keep going. She didn't hide her work to punish anyone. She hid it because the work required it, and then she kept doing the work anyway in the dark without applause for 12 years. That takes something most people underestimate. Not talent, not even discipline exactly. A kind of bedrock, the understanding that what you do has value whether or not anyone is watching, and that the watching is never the point. The intelligence it required, not just the medical knowledge but the navigation, the patience, the reading of every room she walked into. Nobody handed her the ability to sit quietly next to a Rear Admiral at a family event and remain a blank page. She built that, carefully, over years, out of every hard situation she didn't run from, and when Patricia crossed that room and said her name, Vivian didn't look vindicated. She looked, I think the word is steady, like someone who already knew the thing that was only now becoming visible to everyone else. My father put his hand on her shoulder in the parking lot and said nothing. That nothing held more than 12 years of words that hadn't found their shape yet. Some things only arrive when they're ready, and the people who wait for them, quietly without setting themselves on fire to make the waiting more dramatic, are the ones I find myself thinking about when I need to remember what it looks like to live with actual integrity. The fries got cold. They ate them anyway. That part matters too.